Hi, everyone. Welcome to Junior College Night, our first annual Junior College Night, but our first time doing it virtually. So bear with us as we get our bearings. For those of you who have not met me, I'm Stephanie Fuentes. I am one of the high school counselors that works with students in grades 10 through 12. Also here are other two counselors working with students in grades 10 through 12, Jamie Brookman.
Hi, everyone.
Kevin Fleck.
Hi, everybody.
We are also super fortunate to have with us our wonderful department chair, Lauren Moore.
Good evening.
And assistant principal, Mary Rose Joseph, and principal Kyle Hosier. Thanks for being on board with us today.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, good evening.
Our real guests of honor tonight are our esteemed panelists, but I just want to give some general statements before we introduce them. We wish we could all be together in the same room. We miss the energy of kind of being together, but we didn't want to hold off on kickstarting the college process officially for our junior class. So welcome to the official kickoff of working with the counseling department for plans for after graduation. It is the way we're going to kind of structure the evening is we have panelists who are going to talk about some specific topics related in general to the college process, not to necessarily their institutions. We will also then talk about separately how COVID has come into play both on the student end and on the admission counselor end. And then we will have a question and answer session. We are not, the way you are going to be able to ask questions of our panelists tonight is through the link that Ms. Moore included in the email that had the login information for this event. So that form is still live, and we really encourage any students or parent, guardians to ask questions of our panelists, and we will get to as many of them as we can this evening. So I know that in general, the idea of the college search and selection process hopefully is exciting, but with that excitement will also come, it can be quite daunting. There's quite a lot of information around it. There are so many conflicting sources of information. There are so many, you're hearing it from neighbors, from people on public transportation. If they hear you're a high school junior, they're like, where are you in your college process? Get excited because strangers will be butting into your business. It will be coming from every kind of media outlet, paper, print, online, social, everything. And so I really urge students and families to really take a moment to realize that this process has to be individual to the student. We are going to have all this information coming at us, and we have to focus on processing it through a lens that makes sense for us, each individual student in that moment. I have never believed that this process is about, let's see what is the most selective school humanly possible that we can get into and then go there. But rather, where am I going to grow as an individual and feel accepted amongst the community and really take advantage of all of the opportunities available academically, extracurricularly, and socially, because I am going to engage the most fully where I am accepted for being who I am and for the authentic choices that I have made up until the time that I have decided where I'm going to school. So having said that, I wanted to let you know what you can expect from the counseling department throughout the remainder of this school year. And so after the winter holidays, we will be contacting juniors to indicate to give instructions on how to set up. The process will be to set up junior college meetings, and those individual college meetings will be between your counselor, the student, and parents or guardians to discuss the ins and outs of the specific process as it relates to your individual child, or you as the juniors. We will then have a financial aid night officially in late spring. We will have a a college essay writing workshop at the end of the year. And we will, obviously, students can make appointments at any point kind of along the way to meet with counselors outside of that one, really specific college meeting. And then the PTSA also has a meeting that they run in the spring. It's called Student to Student College Night. And we do actually have a senior with us to tell us a little bit more about that. Abby Meyer, it's your turn.
Hi everyone, I'm Abby. I'm a senior, as Ms. Fuentes just said. So, even though we're all at opposite ends of the college process, our 2 years kind of are very similar in that they were very affected by the pandemic and Corona, and that everything is virtual. So, that really impacts how we get to see colleges and how we get to tour them. And one of the really good things that Edgemont provides us with is this PTSA Student to Student College Night, where we can directly talk to students about, they're going to be the seniors from last year for you guys who graduated in 2020. And we get to directly talk to a few seniors from schools that we're interested in and talk to them about whatever we want. It could be information that you traditionally get on a tour, or it could be just random things that you're wondering about college. Maybe you've never been away from home. Maybe you have been away from home, but you don't really know how to do your laundry or what the eating situation is when you're not at home. And so it's those types of really valuable questions you can ask to really help get a sense of what type of school you're interested in and the school that you want to know about. And maybe it'll tell you that you really like the school. Maybe it will tell you that the school is not really for you. And that's really one of the valuable things you can get from speaking to somebody who kind of comes from your town, comes from a similar place, the same high school as you, who knows exactly kind of where you're coming from, because everyone moves on after Edgemont, and it's really important that you find the best place for you. And this is a really, really helpful event to do that. It's run by the PTSA, and this year it's going to be on June 3rd at 6:30. It's an hour of your time. It's not a big time commitment, but it's super, super helpful. You get to talk to three representatives from 3 colleges, and typically there's about 30 colleges represented there. So even if maybe there's a school that you don't know that you're interested in at the time, you should still go, because maybe you could go and see another school and then you find out you're really interested in that school. Or there's likely some overlapping themes from the schools that you're interested in generally. So you'll be able to learn still what it's like when you're going to be going to college, because we're all moving on after high school, and it's really valuable to hear from different people who have a very valuable perspective in this field. They're just fresh out of Edgemont. And so one of the really awesome things about this event also is that there's no parents. So typically on tours, you're not going to ask about laundry. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But that's one of the things I think I asked about that, honestly, because it's really important to come with questions and know exactly not know exactly, but if you don't have questions, basically they'll just talk about their experience, and as questions come up, you can ask them, obviously. But if you come prepared with questions, it kind of helps the conversation run a little smoother. I'm not sure if your guys' event is going to be virtual, but mine was virtual, and it was not awkward or anything at all. It was still extremely, extremely helpful, and it actually helped me add a few colleges to my list that I didn't know that I was really interested in. So it's a really, really valuable event that I think I really encourage everyone who can and is able to participate in, because it really helps to learn more about what college is like from a student, not from a tour guide, not from the history of the college, but from a student who's actually experiencing their freshman year at college, just like you guys are going to be doing soon, and I'm going to be doing soon. So it's really, really helpful, and it's a really, really good event that's run by the PTSA, and I really think you guys should all do it because it's really, really helpful.
Thank you so much, Abby. You're hired because you have just explained one of the most important parts of this process, which is talking to current students who are having the exact experience in the place that you are thinking about considering as a home. So I really appreciate that, Abby. Thanks for sharing. So let's not waste any more time listening to me, because you can access me all school year long, and Mr. Fleck and Ms. Brookman. Let's talk with our panelists who join us tonight from a variety of locations. So first, we're going to hear from Brandy Samaru from Indiana University, Bloomington. And after that, now I have forgotten who's next. Is Erica Padilla from University of Rochester, followed by Asma Malik from Syracuse University, and Austin Kelso from University of Richmond. So I will give it to you, Brandy. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Brandy Samaru, and I'm a Senior Assistant Director of Admissions for Indiana University, located in Bloomington, Indiana. Just a little bit about me. I have been doing this type of work for 15 years now. I've been out on the East Coast for 8 years. So I've been with you all in the Westchester area for 8 years. So I'm very excited and very honored to be here with you tonight. Just a nod. Should I go ahead and talk about researching schools at this point? Okay, just wanted to clarify, we're all dealing with this new virtual environment. So again, bear with us, and thank you for being here tonight. Abby did a phenomenal job. She basically took over what I was going to say tonight. So you all are good. No, there are a few additional things that I did want to share with you tonight. We know this is a challenging time for you. We know this is a stressful time for you. And hopefully we can all share some words of wisdom with you, some ways to help ease this, this search process, this college process for you tonight. I'm going to give you really quick highlights, but it is something that I really would encourage you to reach out to me if you have questions or concerns. If it's not about Indiana, that's fine. Like I said, I've been doing this for 15 years. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have some additional questions. But there are so many schools, so many choices. How are you supposed to decide? So your first step, of course, is going to be to examine your own interest. It's going to be to examine your goals and your plans for the future. Really get to know your strengths, your weaknesses, and your goals. Ask yourself questions. Do I like small class discussions? Do I prefer to observe and ask questions after class? Do I want endless possibilities, or am I more interested in a specialized area? Do I want to stay close to home or go far away? Really examine your answers and understand why they work for you. You do need to also examine what a school can offer you outside of the classroom. We all know that to be a well-rounded individual, you need to have things to do outside of academics. So, one of the top reasons a student will leave an institution is because they are not socially connecting. Make sure you find interest outside of academics. So when you're doing your research, search other opportunities that exist for you. Find the right fit. What does that mean? You're going to hear that phrase so many times throughout your college search process. Well, the right fit. Is this institution going to serve me? Is it going to help me accomplish what I want? These are things you need to be asking yourselves. That's what the right fit is. Now, one of the best ways to do this is to obviously visit campuses. But we know that that's a challenge right now. And I'm certainly not encouraging you to go out and start visiting all of these college campuses right now. But ideally, by the summer, by next fall, we're all in a much better position to be doing that. And hopefully by then, based upon all of this research you're going to do, you've narrowed down your choices, and you can really just visit those top schools that you're interested in. That's going to really show you what that right fit might mean. So in the meantime, many campuses have actually gone above and beyond and are offering you even more opportunities than you would have seen in the past. So go on their virtual pages. See what they have to offer you virtually. Not only can you tour campuses, but you can also sit in on information sessions. Or similar to this student-to-student program that you have, you can have these chats with current students. That is the #1 best way for you to know if that's going to be the right institution for you. Talk with those current students. Take advantage of all of these. This is really going to help you narrow down that list. Now, as far as a list is concerned, use whatever list making tools you find helpful. I'm a big Post-it and a pro-con list maker myself. So this is a great place where you can also engage your parents, your guardians, your counselors. Use their knowledge. Use them as a sounding board. Sometimes it helps just to actually talk about your interests and your likes out loud. Get their feedback going with that. So use your parents in this process as well. So a few things to consider. This is just kind of a rundown list of things that you might want to put on your list. List out your priorities, such as, are you looking for public versus private, a 2-year versus a 4-year institution? Are you looking for a school that has a religious affiliation? Size, that's a big one. Look at small schools, medium schools, large schools. Location, we talked about that a little bit. Distance from home. Are you looking for rural, urban, that college town, or that big city feel? Do you want to go in-state or out-of-state? Or maybe you're thinking international. These are all things to keep in mind. So another important part to ask as well is, where are the students coming from that attend this university? And is that important to you? So are the students mostly from in-state, from where that institution is? Are there any international students, if that's important to you? What's the diversity like on campus? How does that campus community feel? What is the vibe? Now, of course, academics is a key component as well. If you know what you want to major in, that's great. But you also don't have to know at this point. But you want to make sure that you're going to have that flexibility if you don't know. So academics, yes, should be at the top of your list for sure. But then talking about that social environment, that atmosphere, that's going to be key to finding that right fit for you. So athletics, is that important to you? Music and culture, clubs and organizations, are there things to do outside of that classroom? Support services are a big area as well. You want to make sure that transition from high school to college, that's a big deal. So are they going to offer you academic support? Are they going to offer you career services, alumni support? Now, one last thing to take into consideration, cost. Yes, that has to be on your list. Cost is a big one. Now, don't just judge schools by what's posted on their publications. Certainly take it into consideration, but you're not going to know the actual cost of attending that institution until you get that award package. So schools have different scholarships, have different need-based, but it is something to consider and something to have that conversation about. So when first making your list, the sky's the limit. It might start out with big name schools, but as you continue to research and adjust your priorities, this can change. Your list might be completely different than what you started out with, and it might be completely different than your best friends, and that is okay. The key is to make sure that you have a balanced list. You want to include reach schools, those that might be just out of range based upon what's on paper, target schools, those that you meet or exceed the standards for, and likely schools, those that based on past applicants and current standards, you should be well suited for. So the key here is to make sure you have reviewed the school's academic standards as well as other admission criteria. I won't go into this as I know my colleagues are going to discuss this, but it will help to have this all outlined on a list to see where you fall. Again, speaking with your parents and your counselors about this will be very helpful. Just remember, no matter what you decide, if you are comfortable with it and it makes you happy, it's the right choice for you. The right school is out there for everyone. Utilize your resources, the internet, parents, former students, counselors, and of course, those like myself. We would love to assist you. All you have to do is ask. So again, I'm just going to turn it back over to Stephanie and we'll get on with the program, but let me know if you have questions.
Thank you so much, Brandy. We will turn it over to Erica, who's going to talk about holistic review.
Hi, folks. My name is Erica Padilla. I'm the Regional Associate Director for the New York Metro area for the University of Rochester, which is a very lengthy way of saying I'm regionally based in Westchester County, and I'm your admissions counselor at Rochester. I've actually been in admissions for about 20 years at varying institutions, ranging from small liberal arts to now at Rochester, a research institution. So I've been charged to talk a little bit more about holistic review. And if you'll forgive the term, because it is a very, very big buzz term in admissions. As you talk to admissions officers, often we will reference our application review process in the context of holistic. That generally means that we're reviewing the whole individual when it comes to the application process. But as you've heard actually from Brandy's description, we're all very different. And as you're going through your research process, you'll notice that in addition to being different, we all have unique individual admissions processes. And so how holistic gets applied will vary by institution. In fact, not every institution will use the phrase holistic review. With more and more schools going test optional because of the pandemic, you'll start hearing the phrase more and more frequently. As I've spoken to students over the last several months, I've been urging students to really ask for more detailed information from institutions when they do use the phrase, to contextualize the definition of holistic as it applies to their institution. Because I think having tangibles, specific items that you can connect to will actually be really, really important. Generally, when it comes to applications, I think there are two key areas that universities are focused on. The first is usually personal characteristics of the student or the applicant. And the second are academic components. And that's kind of how you can break out holistic review. Personal characteristics, usually things like biographical information, activities that you're involved in, will account for things connected to leadership, your passion and dedication, civic engagement, open-mindedness. What is your concern for others? Are you someone that's dedicated and has a sustained commitment to community? And overall, we are looking for some of these characteristics because we want to understand your potential contribution to our individual communities. So in the context of activities, usually when I review applications, I'm not really looking specifically at the number of activities, but rather the quality of the experiences that those activities have actually meant to the student. And that's usually pretty clear based on the description and the number of hours that a student has dedicated to that activity. Long and sustained commitment is really what we're looking for. It could be in the form of work, it could be club activities, it could be community organizations, the list goes on, so long as you're demonstrating your passions and the continuity of that involvement. Family responsibilities also speak to strong character and to leadership, especially now with the impact of COVID. It's actually, in a lot of cases, reframed some of the responsibilities that students have at home. Do any of you have younger siblings at home that you might, for example, be tutoring because they're also taking classes from school? Be sure to let us know about those. Also, work, as I described a moment ago, if you've been someone that has actually been working before the pandemic, that also speaks to dedication, leadership, commitment. We also want to know more about just individual interests, hobbies, things that you're curious about. If you are someone that's really passionate about something that maybe is not an activity in school, it could be, for example, that you've taught yourself how to play an instrument. If you're someone that loves to code, things like that actually can be conveyed through your resume of activities, but also letting us know that it's something that's you're really, really uniquely interested and passionate about, because it speaks again to that continuity that we're seeking. In general, I think it's important to note that COVID has required that we reinvent and reframe our participation in activities. I don't want to jump too far ahead into something that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but we are well aware of the fact that the pandemic has impacted the continuity of student activities, and also in many cases, either interrupted activities, canceled plans for the summer, and has asked students to really rethink how they go about their individual participation in whether it be clubs in school or find other ways of getting involved through other channels, such as using all the virtual platforms that we're all using. To know more about the student and their commitment to community, letters of recommendation are a wonderful way to know more about the individual student. Your teachers, it's important to start thinking about what teachers you'd want to ask for a letter of recommendation from, because they're going to let us know about who you are in the classroom. Are you the kind of student that will raise your hand? Are you someone that perhaps is quiet, but very giving of your time to your peers in class? Are you someone who's very curious and will stay after class perhaps to have a conversation about a topic or subject that you were discussing? Your counselors, they're going to let us know more about who you are as a member of your community at Edgemont. So As it pertains to your class, how do you stand out as a member of your class? Are there characteristics that perhaps don't rise as obvious within your application that they can tell us a little bit more about as it pertains to who you are within your community at school? Fun fact and an interesting fact that often students don't know is we have a direct line with the guidance office, and they do a really, really wonderful job of educating us as to what's available to you in school, what opportunities are offered, and any nuances about the academic program at your school, as well as any changes that may have happened. So since we're on the topic of just letters of recommendation, I think by and large, most institutions will probably underscore the importance of academics, which is the second part that I mentioned before as it pertains to holistic review. Most schools, I think, are looking for students that have a strong academic fit. As Brandy was talking about being realistic and knowing who you are as a student, it's because we want you to be successful on our campuses. So making sure that the academic program is a good fit for you, that it feels like you're actually going to pursue your goals, but also have the supports will be really, really important. On the side of colleges and universities, we're seeking students that are going to be academically and intellectually curious, that have an enthusiasm, a real love of learning. How do we go about assessing that? We're looking at your transcript. We are going to be looking at the rigor of your classes, what types of academic choices you've made in school. And within this context, I'm not specifically talking about how many AP classes did you take? Did you take them all? Did you take all the advanced courses or perhaps all the dual enrollment courses that are available? But rather, what was available and why did you make the decisions to pursue those specific classes? Were those a good fit for you? It's not about taking every class that's available, but making sure that you're making wise choices that are actually going to allow you to explore the things that you're curious about. Everything is done within the context of your high school. So we can't hold you accountable for classes that are not available to you. And as I mentioned a moment ago, your counselors do a really good job of sharing with us details about your academic program. So you don't have to worry about necessarily elaborating on some of those things. And if we have any questions, we also are very happy to reach out to your counselors to get a little more clarity if there are any concerns or things we want to understand more about. Trends, you'll often hear admissions counselors talk about, we want to see trends in your transcript, an upward trend. Sometimes when you start high school, perhaps it was a little rocky. The transition from middle school to high school can sometimes be a shift. That can actually mean that perhaps you started a little wobbly, but then as the years have gone on, you've succeeded in just getting a little stronger academically, gaining self-confidence, and it's obvious when you look at your transcript. Again, we're going to talk about COVID in a few minutes, but I think we all understand that COVID has also asked students to basically leave the classroom and be in a virtual space. And as an admissions counselor and with all admissions officers that I've spoken to, I think we've all understood that this is a really difficult and challenging time for students. We are well aware of that. And we will absolutely work with you to make sure that we're supporting you through the process. The latter part, letters of recommendation, which I mentioned a moment ago, also we'll talk about who you are as a student. So yes, as a member of your community, but as a student, what characteristics stand out? Your teacher might tell us more about the type of learner that you are in the classroom. What are some characteristics that perhaps stand out about your style or your approach to learning in the classroom? As well as maybe samples of just examples of the type of work that you've submitted to your teachers. Another facet of understanding who you are or your academic match is testing. And this is a very, very, very heavy conversation right now, given everything that is happening. But traditionally, testing will often be either SAT or ACTs. And in some instances, schools will ask for additional testing. That could be in the form of things like SAT 2s, depending on perhaps specific areas of academic interest that you're pursuing, maybe a major or a unique program. So it's important to educate yourself early if there are any specific or unique requirements as it pertains to testing for the schools that you're pursuing. Now more and more schools are moving in the direction of test optional. Test optional means that the choice is in the hands of the student. So if you want to submit testing, you can, but we don't require it necessarily. The big question that I've been getting from students as it pertains to test optional is, if I make the decision to not submit testing, are you assuming that I didn't do well on the exam? we're assuming that you don't want to submit your tests because you don't want to be defined by tests, or right now with everything that's been happening, perhaps you didn't have access to testing immediately. But it's a good conversation to have with the individual institutions to verify if there are any specific unique aspects to testing that if your decision to go test optional, would that in any way influence your access to a program, your access to scholarships? There are some instances where the choice to go test optional could in fact impact not necessarily admission to the institution, but possibly admission to a unique program that you're interested in. There's a great website, fairtest.org. You can find out more about it through your counseling office. It also has a very comprehensive list of institutions that have gone test optional. And then the last term that you'll hear a lot, test blind. As we've gone through the pandemic, a growing list of schools have decided to go test blind. That basically means that regardless of your personal choice, we are not looking at testing at all. You can feel free to submit it, but it will not account in any way within our process. So where test optional puts the decision in the hands of the student, test blind means that the institution is making a sweeping decision that testing will not form part of the process. As you're learning about the different options at different institutions, bear in mind that some of these policies might be changing and some of these policies may be temporary for this year. So as you're working through the process, please remain abreast of some of these changes and talk to your counselors because they can let you know if there have been any changes on the horizon for some of the policies and if there's anything else that you should be aware of. I'm going to pause right there. I'm going to throw it right back to Ms. Fuentes so we can talk about more factors in the process.
Thank you so much. We're going to give it over to Asma to talk about the different components of the application.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. My name is Asma Malik. I'm the Director of Admissions for the Metro New York office. I am based in our Manhattan Academic Center on the Upper East Side. Well, right now I'm working out of my guest bedroom in my home in Long Island. I am the Westchester rep. I've been with Syracuse for 4 years, and prior to Syracuse, I worked at NYU for 7 years in different capacities in graduate admission, law school admission, and undergrad. And I'm happy to be here today. So a couple of things that I'm going to go over are different components of the application. So I'll talk a little bit about interviews, the essay, and demonstrated interest. So the interview really provides college to give you an opportunity to ask any questions you have, but more importantly, it gives the college a chance to learn more about you, your interests, and how you will contribute to their environment and their community. So there are some benefits. You know, it definitely gives the admissions committee a deeper understanding of the student that is applying. It gives you as a student the opportunity to discuss your experiences throughout high school, maybe elaborate on, you know, any academic trends that were mentioned before by my colleagues. You can elaborate on your interests and goals. And at the end of the day, really just to, you know, demonstrate your interest for that school. If you're truly interested, you know, what better opportunity than to sit down with someone who's going to be reviewing your application or, you know, be part of the review committee and to provide some insight. A lot of students ask, like, so interviews, it says that it's encouraged or required. Should I do it? Is it really that important? So kind of rule of thumb, if we are a top school for you, you know, let's say if you're looking at a school and they're in the top 5 for your list and it says that it's highly recommended, encouraged, think of it as required. You want to try to get as much face time with that admissions office to reiterate your interest. And then also interviews will sometimes play a really big role in honors program, in merit-based scholarships, and opportunity programs as well. And we've seen this shift where more and more colleges have gone test optional and they need one other evaluating factor. So they're starting to offer interviews. Just keep in mind, interviews should only be done your senior year. So you might be ready as a junior, but we want you to hold off on it because requirements are constantly changing. So we want to make sure that you have the most accurate information when you're meeting with us. Wanted to kind of emphasize a few things when you do decide to do an interview. Make sure you do your research. It is the worst thing to go into an interview and I'm like, so why are you interested in Syracuse? Well, I was just doing research and I Googled it and I found it. Like, that's not an appropriate answer. So do research, go a step further. Look at the academic programs that are offered. What interests you, what faculty members are doing research in, and maybe that's something you're passionate about. Look at their mission statement. Try to learn about the campus culture. Look at the student clubs and organizations that are offered, because then you can make a connection as to how you can fit into that environment. And now more than ever, there's so many virtual information sessions available from all different colleges. So you can watch all those beforehand and you'll be very well prepared when you're going into the interview. Make sure you have a set of questions ready to ask the rep. It could be about the college or the admissions rep itself. So make sure that you put your best foot forward. Sometimes this is the only opportunity you'll have to make a very strong impression beyond the application that you're submitting. So make sure you take advantage of it. So kind of going into the next part, essays and supplement essays. I know this is something that students stress about. At the end of the day, the most important part of the application process is the academics. Like if you don't have strong academics, but everything else in the application is stellar, sometimes that is not enough to push you through the review process to ultimately be admitted. But the admission officers are always trying to get to know their applicants. There's only so much that we can really deduce from extracurriculars and transcripts, test scores, letters of recommendation. But the best way to get an idea of the student's goals, accomplishment, character, and personality is through that essay. So we want to see that obviously students have a basic command of like good writing, grammar and spelling, everything is good. They're responding to the prompt that they have selected. But most importantly, we want to hear from that 17 or 18-year-old. Like, I read thousands of applications. I can very quickly tell when it's the voice of a 55, 60-year-old lawyer versus a 17-year-old student. And trust me, we want to hear from the 17-year-old student. We're trying to connect all the different dots of that application. So when we look at the student's grades and we're looking at the letters of recommendation, that is all going to be complemented by their essay. That's how we know that this is truly the student that is applying is the one writing the essay. A lot of students stress about making sure that they're using the right words and they end up overusing the thesaurus just to sound impressive. And honestly, the natural style is most important. I can tell when you overuse the thesaurus. If I have to go and look up a word, that is usually not a good sign, especially when we're trying to read applications quickly. So don't stress about trying to write what you think we are looking for. Just showcase who you are. Be genuine. That's what we wanna know. Do not take information from other parts of the application. For example, students will sometimes take their extracurriculars and put it in a paragraph format. It's like, no, I already have the bullet format on the common application extracurricular list. You don't need to put it in an essay format, but maybe there's one specific activity that you participated in that was so impactful and has helped you grow as an individual, then yes, that is something that you should tell us. But really use the essay, give us information that we can't get from any part of the application. The supplement essay is an additional piece of writing that some colleges either encourage or require. Once again, as I said, if it's highly encouraged, you should do it. Because if you're going to take that extra step, that you're going to come off as a very serious applicant. Each supplement essay is an opportunity for you to demonstrate interest in the school and obviously tell more about yourself. Just keep in mind that supplement essays tend to be a lot smaller in terms of word limit. So you have to be straightforward. You have to be concise. You have to make sure you get your point across. But you don't also want to be vague. So how can you avoid doing that? Do your research. Be specific with your examples. If you want to study at Syracuse University because of our study abroad options. Don't tell me I have 5 study abroad options. I know I have 5 study abroad options. But let's say you really want to study in Florence because we have this amazing art program and you're passionate about that, then tell me more about that. And if you're undecided, that's perfectly fine. You know, there are different characteristics of the college that you're looking at that stand out to you. So let us know that. I know that putting these college applications are time consuming and they're stressful. And, you know, time and time again, I see students that will write very like general, vague supplement essays and they'll start swapping out names. All of a sudden, you know, Syracuse University for University of Miami and so on and so forth. And we can pick up on that. Now, a lot of times students forget to remove the name, which is not great. And it happens a lot more than you would think. But if you can just swap out a name and submit that essay, that means that you're not being specific enough. That means you're not making a connection, and that defeats the purpose of that supplement response. So make sure you put the same amount of effort that you put in your common application essay in that supplement. Very often I will read these very polished and finessed common app essays and I get to the supplement, I'm like, you clearly did this 10 minutes before the application deadline. Or why do I feel like you're texting me and like you're my friend and you're not actually submitting a college application? So be mindful of that. And the next thing I want to discuss is demonstrated interest. So this is a soft quality that admission offices consider through the application process. It is different for every college. It basically refers to a wide variety of actions on your part that boil down to how interested are you in that institution? How enthusiastic, how curious are you about the school that you're applying to? Generally, colleges use demonstrated interest to predict yield, which refers to the percent of admitted students who ultimately end up enrolling at their school. Yield is important to colleges because they want to make sure that most of the students that they're admitted actually end up enrolling, and it makes them more desirable, which honestly, every college is thinking about their rankings. Every college wants to be, you know, a little higher in those rankings. And unfortunately, this is one thing that is taken into account. Usually using demonstrated interest, it's a strong predictive tool that colleges will determine if you're going to enroll or not. And the degree that you are interacting with us is what we're going to take into account. And we want to make sure that we're enrolling the right type of students, but also the right number of students. You know, if I only have 3,600 seats, I have to make sure that I do not end up enrolling 4,000 students, right? Because they're not going to be enough beds for the students to faculty ratio, the classroom sizes, the quality of education will be impacted. So this is something that all colleges are thinking about. They just use different tools to determine that. So unlike grades and test scores and extracurriculars, which you could clearly put on your application, demonstrated interest is not something that you could just put on there. Basically, we will see the interaction that you've had with our office, whether it's through signing up for a virtual information session, you know, attending the virtual high school visit, and hopefully one day we'll have in-person high school visits. You know, attending an interview, you know, reaching out to the admission officer, interacting with them, even, you know, how often you're opening the emails that we're sending. You know, we have very sophisticated systems that can track if a student opens the email, how long they click on a link for it and they stay on there, how are they interacting. So that's all taken into account. And then obviously the biggest form of demonstrated interest is to apply early decision or early action. But I won't go into that too much, but I will say that demonstrated interest can be taken into account for different parts of the application process. For some schools, you know, it will very heavily be taken into account if a student should be waitlisted or admitted. For other schools like Syracuse in the past, demonstrated interest played a huge role when we were taking students off the wait list. But you know, we are in a different time right now. So schools are looking at these numbers differently. You know, we on our side are worried that students are applying to 25, 30 schools And, you know, really how serious are you about your college list if you're just applying to that many schools? You know, what's the likelihood that if we do admit you, you are going to enroll? These are all like institutional priorities that we have to take into account and making sure that we end up with the right class. And I would also like to say, please don't start stalking your admissions rep. Like that's not a good way to demonstrate interest. But if you're going to reach out, be mindful, be thoughtful about the outreach that you're doing. And, you know, parents, I know the intentions are always good and you want to help your child, but students, you should be driving this process. You should be signing up for those virtual information sessions. You should be attending those webinars, even though you can't put your camera on. And when that time does come and you can visit campus and we do have structured visitations, you know, students, you should really be taking charge of that conversation, because at the end of the day, this is your experience. And you know, when you're going to be in that college setting, you know, your family members are not going to be physically there to assist you in the classroom. So you want to make sure that you're doing your research and you're finding the right fit for you, where you will ultimately be happy. So I'm going to turn it over back to Stephanie, and thank you.
Thank you. You guys have been so informative. Austin, no pressure. It's your turn.
Well, I'd like to think you saved the best for last, right? Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Austin. I am an assistant director of admission at the University of Richmond, which is a small private liberal arts university outside of Richmond, Virginia, as our name suggests. I have been with the University of Richmond for 5 years, working in our admission office, and I'm also an alum, graduating with degrees in environmental studies and geography and the environment. Prior to working in admission, I spent time working in a nonprofit. So I worked in South Africa with adolescent health and HIV and AIDS. So just a little bit about my background. So I want to touch on a question that I often hear, and I'm sure my colleagues hear throughout the admission process every single year. And this is a question that I typically hear from seniors over the summer before their senior year, or in the fall of their senior year when they're completing applications. And the common question is, how do I stand out in a selective admission pool, or how do I stand out in the admission process? And I think students are really getting at the idea of, you know, how do I increase my chances of admission? And look, it's a question we hear all the time, and I think we've been led to believe that, you know, through college guidebooks and the news and Google searches and even people that we know, right, who have gone through the process before, that there is a myriad of tricks out there that you can employ that will significantly boost your odds of getting into the schools that you're applying to, right? And if only you can get a hold of these different tricks, you can ultimately increase your chances of admission. And not to oversimplify things, but as you're approaching the college application process, there really isn't a secret sauce, right? That you know, you can put on your application to magically increase your chances. And I think if there was, you know, colleges would be sharing that with you. We're relatively open about what we want to see from our applicants, and what we want to see in their applications, and what we're looking for in terms of enrolling a class of talented students. And so I think when you go back to the question of how can I stand out as an applicant, you know, if you want to put together an application that stands out or stands apart, I encourage you to not make your goal to stand out at all. When you think about the college application process, when you boil it down to its simplest form, I think really what we're trying to do is just to understand who you are as a student, as a person, what your experiences are, and ultimately through all of that, why might you be a good fit on our college campus, right? Why are you a good fit inside of our classrooms and as a part of our campus community? And so when you're approaching the applications, I think when you approach it from the standpoint of trying to stand out, or you know, doing something unique in your application, I think what happens is you ultimately will lose a little bit of yourself along the way. I think you will see applicants every year who try to show us what they think the colleges want to see. And ultimately, it's not an authentic view of the student. And in my experience, these are the applications that I think tend to fall a little bit flat. because the students haven't given us an honest representation of who they are. And that's really all we're trying to find out through this process. And so as you're sitting here now, it's November of your junior year, and you're thinking about embarking on searching for colleges and ultimately next year, right, applying. I encourage you not to let this question of how can I be an applicant that stands out, not to let that be your North Star, so to speak, in this process. And instead, I encourage you to let the focus be on introspection. And Brandy talked about this when it came down to fit. You know, and I think it's a great time to talk about this, because as you are thinking about the college search process, right, in the coming months, whether that's visiting campuses, if that will be allowed, or attending virtual information sessions, or going on websites, as you try to determine that fit, to do so, or you have to ask yourself a lot of questions. You want to understand who you are, and then ultimately from that, what colleges will be a good fit for you. And as you determine who you are, right, you have to do a lot of introspection in that process. And so, you know, asking yourself the question of who am I, right? What do I need to be happy? What are the things that I need to be successful? What do I value in a classroom experience? What do I value in a social experience? Why do I value these things? And I think the more that you can ask these questions, ultimately, I think the better you'll understand yourself. And so when it comes time to completing that application, if you've gone through this process of introspection through the college search, I think you're ultimately in a much better position to put together an application that is an honest and authentic representation of who you are, and a representation of your experiences and your goals and your talents and your ambitions. And when you're able to do that, I think that is the mark of a really strong application. And I think ultimately, you know, returning to that question of, can I stand out? I think when you do that, that is what makes you stand out in the pool. Because at the end of the day, even though you have peers who may participate in the same activities, right? Who may take the same classes, who may have the same interests, you are the only one that is you. And so I think if you're able to really reflect through this process on who you are, you'll be able to then put forward an application that I think is a really genuine representation of that. And by doing so, I think you will stand out in that application process. So I think that's slightly a more philosophical approach to the college application. And so you might be wondering to yourself, well, you know, are you able to provide some more concrete examples of ways that I can stand out in an application pool, or, you know, even, you know, slightly increase my chances, right? And so I think none of these are make or break things that you can do, but I think I'll give you 3 things to consider as you consider ways to strengthen your application. The first one, and we've talked about this before, is grades, right? We are colleges and universities. We are places of learning. And so the reality is we are admitting you all to be students and students first. And like I said before, we want to make sure that you all are going to be strong contributors inside of our classrooms. And so it is important to focus on your grades and continue to do well. And the reason I bring this up is it is especially important as you approach your senior year next year. Don't take your foot off of the gas. You have worked so hard, right, over the last 3 years inside the classroom. And even though you hit senior year and you're applying to colleges, and that GPA you're putting on that transcript when your application goes out is only showing your 9th through 11th grades, don't let up the gas, because as colleges, we are looking at your senior year grades. And we talked about it tonight before, those trends are important. And we want to make sure that that trend you're on continues through to senior year. From experience, you know, when I'm in admission committee, every year I lose track of the amount of times that a admission officer will say, hey, you know what, can we see the students' first market period grades? Can we see their first quarter performance, right? Because we're interested to see how your academic work continues into your senior year. So don't let your foot off the gas. And I think the more work you can put in the classroom and to continue to do well in 12th grade, I think sets yourself up to be in a stronger position in that application process. The second thing is we talked a little bit about, or Asma talked a little bit about application plans, right? Early decision, early action. Different application plans will confer slightly different benefits. And I'm speaking generally here, right? It is, I'm not saying that all schools, this is, or applies to all schools. But generally speaking, earlier application plans tend to have slightly higher admit rates, right? And the differences in those admit rates between early application plans and later ones will differ at every school. And so it's important to ask the question. But, you know, if you are interested in a certain school and you know, hey, this school is my first choice, right? Well, maybe it's worth having the conversation if early decision is the right application plan for you. Now, early decision obviously is a binding contract, and so it's quite a big commitment for you and your family to make. And as colleges, we recognize that early decision may not be the right plan for a lot of students. And so if you find yourself in a position where early decision doesn't make sense, which we understand, but you're still interested in the school, you know, maybe applying on one of their other early plans, like early action, for example, is a great way to apply. And, you know, I mentioned before that, you know, it differs slightly between colleges. As you go through the search process, ask those questions, right? If you're speaking with admission officers, you can ask the question, hey, how many students are you enrolling through each application plan? And you can kind of get a sense of, are they taking more students early through these early plans or later plans? And you can allow that to inform a little bit of how you apply. The one thing I do want to note is that I mentioned early decision may confer a higher admit rate. I think it's very important as you approach early decision to not focus on early decision as a strategy for application, right? Really, you know, be considering if you want to apply early decision, that you are only applying early decision to a school that you believe is the right fit for you and you absolutely want to attend if admitted, rather than applying early decision typically because you want to be in a pool that may have a higher admit rate, right? That's very, very important. And as colleges, we want to make sure that if you're applying ED, that you really do mean it and you really do see our school as a good fit. And the last one is just knowing the game. And Asma talked about this a little bit before with knowing what schools are looking at in their application process. She mentioned interviews. She mentioned demonstrated interest. And so it's a good thing to know what schools are looking at. And if a school is, for example, using demonstrated interest and you are interested in that school, well, you know, if you want to strengthen your application to that school, well, maybe it's important to demonstrate interest, right? And it's also important to understand what ways the school is looking at, what ways of demonstrating interest they're looking at, right? So ask those questions of the admission officers, ask that question of the admission office to understand, you know, what things you have to do to demonstrate interest if this is a school that you really like and you want to apply to. And the same goes for interviews. You know, if you are passionate about a school and they're suggesting interviews, well, those are a good thing to do, right? Especially if you want to strengthen your application to a particular school. The last thing I just want to talk about is I mentioned before about the college search process is a wonderful time for introspection, and that introspection will ultimately inform your application, right? And putting forward an authentic and genuine representation of who you are. This process of introspection for you students out there, this should be led by you because ultimately the application should be a representation of you. And not those around you, particularly your parents, right? It's great through this process to have a strong support network. And I think it's great for families to be involved. I think the college process can be a family process. But ultimately, as you determine fit and you determine the answers to these questions of what do you value in a college education or in a classroom environment or a social environment, it's important that the conclusions that you come to are your conclusions and not what other people think you might want or think you might value or think what is important for you in this process. But these are your answers. And so while I think it's great to involve your family, and this can be a great bonding experience for families, ultimately be the driver of that introspection process. And I think when you do that, you'll not only be able to determine the fit of schools that you're looking at, but it'll also inform a bit more of a genuine view of your application as well. All right, and with that, all I want to talk about, I'll pass back over to Ms. Fuentes, and I think we're going to talk about some application in the world of COVID.
I want to just publicly announce how impressed I am with our panelists. I know you guys were amazing when I asked you, but having talked to a no audience myself and being super concerned, super nervous about it. You guys are superstars. Thank you so much. So we will beg you to continue. We would love to hear from you about the experiences you're having with COVID on your campuses, what you're hearing about concerns from applicants, and how you see things may differ for you. I know some of you have, certainly started to mention that previously, but we'd love to hear a little bit more. Brandy, are you ready?
Sure. So just a little bit about as far as what's going on campus. Things are actually looking pretty good on campus. We are keeping things under control. This is our last full week on campus for those that chose to take classes on campus. We are in a hybrid model. So they will finish out the semester online. And then students who choose to will return to campus in February. So we are doing a good job. Our students are doing an excellent job of remaining safe, which brings me a little bit to the application. We really do put our students' safety first, as we know that your high schools are putting your safety first. So we understand that there has been a disturbance, I guess you could say, in your academic career as far as switching from in-classroom to online. We are in a learning curve just as you are in a learning curve. So we are seeing that on applications, but we are still doing what we've always been doing. We are leaving it up to the high schools to best evaluate you. And that is part of keeping you safe. So we will be factoring in how each high school went about their virtual learning. So that is something we will be taking into consideration. So far with current applicants, we've not seen that much of a disturbance. It looks like students are very much succeeding in this virtual world. While it might be stressful, we're not seeing it on the transcripts like I thought that we might. So we are getting through, and we are taking it day by day.
Erica?
I love that you ended with day by day, because that's exactly how I feel like we've all been approaching this. Very similar to what Brandy described as far as, thankfully, we've been very fortunate on campus with managing cases. We've actually only had a few. We are also about to wrap up our semester and send students home for the holiday season, and we won't reopen for in-person classes until February. We've also had a hybrid model, and it's just required that we reinvent the definition of community and how we actually go about having that spirit of collaboration, that feeling of community that students come to college for, using all these various platforms, because we've also had students who are essentially doing virtual classes from all around the country and also all around the planet. We have had students that are also overseas. So far, our review process, we are seeing some changes to our early decision applicants. There are smaller numbers of international students that are also applying as a result of the pandemic. We're seeing more students that are closer to home applying, some looking at early decision. But I think the biggest change at Rochester this year is that we went test optional last year, and we have an early decision 2 deadline that we just added. So that's also caused some changes to our application review process and how we're going to flow through. Overwhelmingly, I think students have demonstrated grit. They've demonstrated tenacity. Congratulations, because you've been successful in surviving what has been one of the most bizarre ends of last year and just crazy summer and onset of this year. And that's really all we ask, for students to keep working hard and doing their best. And I think that's also the case for our students on campus. So, and day by day.
Thank you. Asma?
Sure. So very similar to what Erica and Brandy mentioned, Syracuse was in a hybrid model. We had a little more than 10,000 students on campus. We finished up our semester last week. So every student had to test negative in order to travel home, and with that testing. We were doing regular testing throughout the semester, but it looked like there was COVID fatigue. And so we did see a little bit of a spike. So the students that have tested positive are just quarantining on our campus right now. And once they are healthy and safe, they will be going home. Overall, current students that were there were so appreciative that they were actually able to be on campus. And that really, did help with just getting motivation and being involved. In terms of the application process, so this is the first year that we are fully test optional. In the past, we've only been test optional for our performing arts school. So at least we had a little bit of experience in it, but now looking at an application pool of potentially, 35 to 38,000, it's going to be different. What we've decided is we're going to put a lot of emphasis on the curriculum. We've always done that, but now since there is one less factor to take into consideration, we're going to be looking at the curriculum the student is enrolled in very heavily. We do anticipate a lot of students are going to look very similar academically, but we're going to try to dig a little deeper and try to find the students that would be most successful in our classroom. We're not anticipating a huge application increase, which I know was like stressing students out because they're like, I normally would be able to be admitted to Syracuse and now I can't because there'll be more students applying because you know what, there are also thousands of other schools that have gone test optional. So it's not just one. We are obviously going to be very flexible when it comes to extracurricular activities. We know that there are a lot of limitations that have been placed on you and it's not just you, it's, every single student that's applying. So we're going to be conscious about that. And we're going to try to determine who you are as an individual and what you can bring to our campus in other ways, such as interviews and the essay and everything else that was mentioned here. We're really excited to bring in this class. Right now, we have not made a decision if we are going to be test optional next year. We will probably have a better understanding of that once we have put a class together for the incoming fall. And then we'll probably make a decision a little bit later in the spring.
Austin.
Yes, and at Richmond, I think we are in a similar boat as well. So we have a student population of around 3,000. And so we are in a hybrid model. And I think we had 300 students chose to go remote. So all of our classes are being offered in person as well as remote. And we are ending our semester of in-person instruction at the end of this week. So when students go home for Thanksgiving break, they will not return. They'll do 2 weeks of virtual classes followed by exams. And I think the word grit is a great way to describe you all and our current students. I think that there was, coming into this year, there was a feeling that, colleges wouldn't be able to stay open, right? And that college students wouldn't be able to rise to the challenge of keeping a safe environment. And I've been so impressed with not only our students, but as well as high school students around the country as well. Really rising the challenge and maintaining a safe learning environment. In terms of our application process, we have historically not been test optional. So for this application cycle, we did move to become test optional, which I think has been a nice shift for us. It's been a good opportunity to take a step back and I think really take more time on applications to really dig deeper past the test scores and really focus on students' characters, their values, and their engagement. And so I think it's been a good experience for us to really take more time on each application, without test scores, to dig into some of the other personal qualities as we make that decision. Just like Syracuse, we are only test optional for this year officially, and in April or May, we'll go ahead and make that decision if we're going to remain test optional for next year or in the future, but that decision is to be determined.
Thank you so much. You guys have been incredibly informative, so much so that we don't have a huge number of questions, but we have some good ones. So Lauren Moore is going to help us out with that.
Hi, everyone. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them now on the Google form that I sent in an email, and I will, I'm looking at them live. Some of the questions I know we answered, but I think it'll be good to reiterate them. So reps, please jump in as I ask the questions. The first question is, how important will freshman year grades be for the class of 2022? I know sophomore and junior year grades are more important, but with COVID, do you think freshman year will be looked at more closely?
Yes, I think so. I think some of what I talked about earlier in reference to trends does apply, because there's an implication that when you transition from middle school to high school, there's a change in expectation, and the environment in high school and the classroom is probably different. And so it's still within context. So yes, more weight will be given to actually having physical grades for that first year of high school, but that doesn't in any way disqualify the remainder of your academic program now in junior year. And then also, as Austin was talking about earlier, the start of senior year. Keep in mind, by the time you apply, we probably will have marking period grades released to us. So there will be some continuity. And as I mentioned earlier, also, your counselors do a really good job of giving us context. So we're not just looking at the end of last year or this year and thinking that the pandemic has affected the ability to actually give you grades without understanding what exactly that has meant in the classroom and how exactly the curriculum has unfolded over the last several months, because they have been working with your administration and with your teachers to make sure that the progress, that there hasn't been a gap in your schooling. So we play it by ear. We have to continue working with you individually and meet you halfway. But at least the first year of high school will give us a baseline from which we can continue reviewing your application.
Thank you. Next question. Is there a difference between taking the SAT without essay or with the essay in terms of acceptance?
So it depends on the college you're applying to. I think we could do a show of hands. How many required the writing section? So none of us. So literally the writing section will not have any impact on the application process. For me, like specifically at Syracuse, even if you submit it, my system is designed not to pick it up. So I don't even know what the score is. So do your research. You can usually find this information on the admissions website to the individual colleges, and they'll let you know if they're taking the writing into account or not. If they are, sometimes they will publish an average. If not, reach out to the admissions rep and find out what their average is for an admitted student for that particular program you might be applying to, and then I'll give you an idea of how competitive you'll be in the application pool.
Thank you. Next question. What measures are colleges doing to change assessments given the significant environment and educational impact of students last year and this year? Clearly, here in Edgemont, students' education has been impacted by half-day remote and half-day in-person instruction. How are the students in the affected states going to be put up against other states where there was no impact in their learning environment?
I just kind of a short response to that is that we are not reviewing students we're only reviewing students within the context of their school and their environment. So we will not be reviewing students against students from other states. It's going to be within the own student's context. So we will be working with the counseling staff to know exactly what your system was and how your individual students were impacted, how you switched up your grading, how you all handled the virtual environment. So it will be within the context of your individual school.
And the only thing I would add is as we review applications in the wake of COVID, I think there's a sense of understanding. You all have been under a lot of stress, and we understand that. I think as we do virtual events, we hear from you all, we get it. And so as we review your transcripts, we know that there's been significant disruptions, and we're absolutely taking that into account as we're looking at your transcript, even within the context of your own high school.
I think there's one thing to mention also is like, we're your reps. We know your school very well. We know how rigorous your curriculum is. We know how your teachers push you. There's no inflation of grades. So we already have that history about the school and the students that have attended our institutions and have done well. You know, there's statistical data that we can use to determine a student's ability to be successful depending on the school that they're coming from you know, the history of the students that have been attended. So that is all information that is going to be taken into account. So I think there is an advantage there that, you know, you have people that specifically recruit in that area and that know the counseling team and understand that. But there's that open line of communication, as Brandy said, with the counseling office, information that they're sending us through the high school profile or the letters of recommendation. They're going to give us all that context. So we're going to be taking that into account.
Thank you so much. The next question, do colleges look at weighted GPAs any differently than non-weighted GPAs?
I think that will also be a school-to-school question. So you want to make sure you reach out to your rep. I would say for Indiana, we look at your best GPA, which is typically your weighted GPA. So definitely reach out to your rep and ask that question. It's a good one.
Yeah, and it's going to vary. Some schools will recalculate your GPA. So they won't just take it right off your transcript, but rather look at the individual classes. Raise your hand if you recalculate. Yes. So that generally means looking at individual core classes, English, math, history, so on, and taking the grade at face value, but accounting for rigor. And so when we were talking before about holistic review, an A might be an A or a B might be a B, but a B in a class that might be more rigorous is evaluated differently as we go through the review process. So it's a good conversation to have with each individual institution and a good reason to start having those conversations and establishing your interest.
Thank you. The next question is about SAT, ACT test optional schools. Is it really optional? Can we skip doing the SAT or ACT?
I think go ahead, Asma, go ahead. No?
You go,
I would not necessarily, I'm not in a position to encourage students to decide to not test. I think by and large, if you do have the ability and it's within your possibility to test, go ahead and do it. Having said that, I don't encourage you to travel several states over or several districts over. Please don't chase an exam. Your safety is most important. My experience with test optional, all the other institutions where I've worked and also at Rochester, is your decision to go test optional is your decision to go test optional. We're not inferring that you didn't do well. We're not comparing your choice to go test optional versus another student in your school that perhaps decided to submit testing, but rather, well, what else in your application are the other elements that we're looking at, and how do those match within the context of what we're looking for in an applicant at our institution? I think overwhelmingly, schools will look at testing if that's part of their academic review process, but most admissions counselors will tell you that how you fared in the classroom, what you did within your academic program, by and large, speaks more to who you are as a student and as a learner and your potential for success.
I would also add, like, do your research, ask those tough questions, like, are merit-based scholarships still an option for me if I do not submit test scores? How does the honors college admissions process work for that, right? If there are specific like accelerated programs, you know, I can say for Syracuse, our early admission program with medical schools is not test optional. That is the one thing that we have not moved to test optional. So you have to do your research. While every other program you can apply, you're still going to be considered for merit-based scholarships. You're still considered for everything else. There are those handful of programs that don't. So you really have to do that research, start that conversation with the admissions rep, attend the virtual information sessions. All that information would be discussed with you, and it's always available on the website too.
Great. This was already touched upon, but just to kind of reiterate the difference between ED and EA and how it differs for public and private schools.
So I could talk about the difference between them, and if anyone who's worked at public and private wants to hop in and give that perspective, that'd probably be helpful. So early decision is a binding application plan. So if you apply early decision, you are signing a contract and you are committing to enroll if admitted to the institution. Early action, on the other hand, is similar to early decision in the fact that you will apply on an earlier deadline. You'll probably find out your admission decision earlier, but it is non-restrictive, right? And so if you're admitted to a certain institution under early action, you are not obligated to attend that university. You'll still have your options to select your schools in the spring. One thing to note is that when you're applying early decision, because this is a binding agreement, it is very, very important to do your research ahead of time. I think particularly when it comes to financial aid, because you are locking in, you don't want to find yourself in a position where you've been admitted, you now have to enroll, but you and your family are unable to afford the cost of attendance, right? So it's really good on the front end to have those conversations with your family, to fill out net price calculators. If schools have My Intuition, get a really good sense of what your financial aid package will be before you go ahead and apply early decision, so that you don't find yourself in a sticky situation trying to back out of that agreement. Also, when it comes to early action, you may oftentimes hear some schools will refer to restrictive early action. And so this is an early action plan where if you apply restrictive EA, you are only able to apply early action to that school. So there are some differences there. In terms of the difference between public and private, I don't know if any of our colleagues have experiences in that. As far as I know, I don't think there's any difference between those decision plans between a public and private university. By and large, they're very similar.
Yes, that is definitely true. Next question. Are any of your schools going test optional for next year? Which I believe you guys somewhat answered. Want to just go through one more time for people that maybe missed it?
Richmond will not be test optional for next year as of now, but keep your ears to the floor. That might change in April or May.
Same thing as what Austin said for Syracuse.
Rochester went test optional last year. And for students that do some bit of testing, get ready for this, we're test flexible. So you have the choice to submit SAT, ACT, AP scores, SAT2s, whatever exam you feel is a better definition of you as a student. But yeah, it's going to continue for us, and it doesn't impact in any capacity access to any of our programs.
So Indiana went test optional prior to COVID. So we will be test optional next year. The one piece that may change is that this year we allowed students to change their mind, whether they wanted to be test inclusive or test non-inclusive. That's the one piece that we are weighing right now to see if we're going to have that flexibility next year, but students are still eligible for merit award. Students are still eligible for honors college and directed entry into programs, even applying without test scores.
Thank you. The next question, have many students deferred this year, and does this affect admissions rates in your schools?
Not for Indiana. We did not see a high rate of deferment, and it's not going to impact our incoming class for next year.
For Syracuse, we saw about 200 students, so definitely a lot more than what we usually get. But in the grand scheme of things, you know, in bringing in a class of 3,600 where we admit a lot more than that, it's not going to have a big impact. A lot of students were given the option to defer for a year, for a semester. We're slowly starting to see that the students that deferred for a year are also now saying that they'll come back within a semester. So they're probably going to start in the spring. So the numbers are just going to go down.
We did see an increase at Rochester in deferrals. Not a significant increase though. We're not talking about going into the hundreds and hundreds. So similar to Syracuse, you could defer for a semester, you could defer for a year. But what we did find is some of those students that deferred, once the virtual option was presented, they decided actually to matriculate. And so the number of deferred students actually decreased. And we anticipate that some of those students that decided that they would do a year are actually now going to do a semester and decide to maybe start virtual if they decide to do that in the spring. We're not anticipating any impact at all on next year's class.
Yeah, same here. We don't anticipate any impact. Our deferment is actually doubled, but from 10 students to 20 students. And so that will not have, any notable impact in the admit rates.
Thank you. Just to audience members out there, if you have any last minute questions, please do put them in now because we are coming to the end of the questions. So the next question was, are there a website or websites that make researching easier for many colleges?
I'm happy to take that one if nobody wanted to jump in. Really, there's so many different sources out there. So trusted sources, names that you know are very familiar to you, but really primary sources, folks, the school-specific website. If you want to know about a school, the best place to start is their website, because other websites may have information about a school, but you only know the information is as accurate as if it's coming from their website. And again, utilize students that attend different institutions. Secondhand information about someone who knows someone else who had an experience, not super helpful.
I'd also like to add, I think as, ranking services tend to be a place where students might start a search. Maybe like Princeton Review or US News World Report, and those are obviously trusted rankings. I also be very careful as you look at rankings, and because there are a lot of different organizations out there that will put together rankings for colleges, but the methodology behind how they collect the data is unreliable, and so I think it might lead you to conclusions about certain schools that just aren't true because they're not trusted sources. So rankings are a good place to start. I'm not saying don't use them, but just be careful with the sources that you're taking your rankings from.
With so much changing and so much fluidity given the impact of the pandemic, truly our individual websites and speaking to us is by far the most accurate information that you're going to find. I was earlier going to suggest the National Center for Educational Statistics publishes something called College Navigator. As institutions, we actually have to publish information that speaks to our classes, our demographics. It basically gives you a rundown. It's of everything that we present to the federal government, something that we actually have to update annually, and that is public information that's available through essentially the Department of Education. But again, for last year, so with all the changes that are happening, just staying in touch with us is helpful.
Great, thank you. Final two questions. Why are there advantages to applying ED versus EA?
I guess I brought this one up, so I'll talk about it.
I just mouthed Austin. No, sorry.
Well, look, early decision, I think we talked about is not the right decision plan for a lot of students, right? It doesn't make sense to go early decision. Many of you will want options to select schools in the spring where you've been admitted. And we mentioned it's binding, right? And so there is a financial commitment there. And it's not right for some families to sign up for that financial commitment, right? As a result, there are fewer students that are applying early decision at most schools compared to, let's say, early action or regular decision. So there's fewer students in the pool. And the amount of students that a school will take from early decision, it will vary. But generally speaking, the amount of students that are taking from early decision versus the amount of students that have applied early decision, just based off of the numbers of students in the pool, the admit rates will be higher. And so it's really a byproduct of the numbers of amount of students you're taking and amount of students that are applying. But yes, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. One more question snuck in, so we have two more. How many applications would you typically accept from one school district?
We don't have a limit. More than like 25% of our incoming class comes from downstate. And we are okay with if 50 students apply and they're admissible, we're okay with that. So we don't have limits.
We don't either. And if it's qualified students, I mean, the one thing that I think we talked about a little bit are institutional priorities, right? So if we have 50 applicants from Edgemont and all 50 are applying into our mechanical engineering program, that could present a problem because of just the size of the program and ability to actually diversify the students that are going into that program. But beyond that, it's really, if it's a qualified student that's talented and would be a wonderful addition to the community, we don't really have a percentage. So.
Same here.
Yep.
Nice and easy. Thank you. Final question. Can students speak directly to admissions officers if they have any questions prior to submitting their applications?
Yes.
Please ask those questions before you submit the application, because if you need more clarifying information, after that application is submitted, you can't take anything back. So start that conversation early, and you don't have to be a senior. Like, you can be in 10th grade and just exploring, and you want to talk to an admissions rep, like, they're there to help you.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you guys so much. One last question was just dates for the SATs. I can take that, go to the College Board for SAT dates and registration dates, ACT's website for theirs. And you can also, I would highly recommend checking our website out. We have tons of information about the research process all the way to the application process. If you go onto the counseling website under college information, you'll see lots of different tabs. So please do explore. We encourage both parents, guardians, and students to do so. And students, we also have our Google Classroom page where we post information in addition to the emails we send. So please do make sure you're part of that Classroom page and checking it. And if you're not, please reach out to me or your counselor and we'll get you that join code. Stephanie, I know you wanted to wrap some things up.
I really just wanted to again say how tremendously grateful we are to this amazing panel. I wish I had the forethought to look for a clapping track so that I could play that for you guys, because typically the audience would show their gratitude, but I will do it for you. Thanks so much. I don't mind making, myself look silly. I just, if one thing was so clear, every school treats everything differently. Please never assume what you are told to be true for one school to apply to any other school. And so I think that came through super clearly tonight. And just ask questions. I will speak on behalf of Ms. Brookman, Mr. Fleck, and myself. We are here to answer questions for students, but also for parents and guardians. We know that some of you have been thinking about college since, kindergarten, but some of you have just started tonight because your parents were like, get on this call. So wherever you are is totally fine, because this is an individual process, and there are over 4,000 colleges in the United States and more abroad. So there will be options for any student who wants to attend college. You will have options. So lastly, I just want to say, as much as this college process is so huge, please remember high school is an experience in and of itself. Please be present. This is not just a stepping stone to college. If you make authentic choices in each moment, you will end up with the appropriate options for your next step. Please reach out to your counselors. Please be kind to your fellow classmates in terms of not speaking negatively about any schools or asking private questions about anybody else's process. It's very personal. So thanks again to our panel. We know this is extraordinarily challenging given our new situation. So please always err on the side of reaching out, ask the questions. We typically have breakout sessions after where you are able to speak to your panelists, to our panelists about their individual school. What we will do is follow up with an email to all of you guys with the contact information for the reps who are a part of this program, because they are the people who are going to be your first point of contact with the schools and who will be actually reading your applications. So I will just give 1 second. If each rep wants to take, in the same order, just wants to take a quick second to say ways, a way or two that they think students can start by virtually getting to know your schools. And then we'll say a final good night.
So yeah, everything for us is on our website. We have a virtual visit page for Indiana University, and we have made some great changes for the fall. We are still looking at new options for the spring, but definitely check out our virtual visit page. And if you have problems navigating to it, shoot me an email and let me know. I can get you there.
Similar to Brandy, we have a great virtual events page. We do allow in the spring juniors to start interviewing for admission, especially if we are in this virtual environment. We have also social media, Instagram Live. Our students have been wonderful about loading just video so you can kind of know what a day in the life is like. And also a lot of our students have been available. So if you want to reach out to us and either access a student panel or talk to me about wanting to connect with current students, let me know. They're happy to catch up with you and do a Zoom session just to talk college.
So similar to the other reps, we have a virtual session page. There's the tour option too. I do recommend going beyond just the traditional 40-minute information session. We have college specific information session. It's a great way to get to know faculty, try to understand the vibe and the community on campus through student panels. We are also hosting application workshops throughout the year. So it's a great way to get a head start on your application specific to Syracuse. So the students have found that helpful. And we are more than happy to put you in touch with our current student body. We know that not being able to visit campus and talk to the tour guides there's this element that's missing. So we're going to try to replicate that much as possible. And yes, follow us on social media. Some really great events happening on Instagram and Facebook.
Not much to add for Richmond. We also have a virtual events page, many offerings similar to what our other schools are offering. The one thing I would say is if it's your first introduction to Richmond, we have a virtual information session and a live tour. So you'll hear from an admission officer about admission aid at Richmond, and then 2 current students will walk you through a tour of campus. So that's a really great place to start before you dive into some other event options.
Juniors and families of juniors and those supporting juniors throughout the process. And for those of you underclassmen folks who hopped on, excellent. Please know that there will be another side to this process where you get to go to school and go to college. So thank you so much for spending your evening with us. And we would normally say get home safe, but enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks again to our panelists.
Everyone, good luck.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.